The fluorescent light above my workbench flickered as I adjusted the microscopic components of my latest prototype. 3 a.m. in suburban Denver, and I was still hunched over my kitchen table that doubled as a laboratory, surrounded by circuit boards, tiny sensors, and coffee-stained notebooks filled with equations that most people would mistake for hieroglyphics. The apartment was silent, except for the gentle hum of my soldering iron and the occasional frustrated sigh that escaped when a connection wouldn't hold. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My sister Jessica's voice had been echoing in my head all evening, sharp and disapproving as always. Emma, you're 32 years old with a master's degree from MIT, and you're living like a broke college student. She'd said it during our monthly coffee meeting, gesturing at my thrift store sweater and my phone with the cracked screen that I'd been putting off replacing for 8 months. When are you going to stop playing inventor and get a real job? I'd stirred my coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl into patterns that reminded me of the fluid dynamics equations I'd been working on for months. Jessica sat across from me in her pristine business suit, fresh from her promotion to senior partner at Denver's most prestigious law firm. Her manicured nails tapped impatiently against her designer handbag as she waited for my response. The coffee shop buzzed with the morning rush of professionals heading to their corporate towers, and I felt like an alien in my worn jeans and sneakers. "I'm working on something important," I had told her simply, not mentioning that I'd been surviving on ramen noodles and freelance coding gigs to fund my research. I couldn't explain that what looked like failure to her was actually the most crucial phase of everything I'd been building toward for the past 5 years. Jessica had rolled her eyes in that way she'd perfected since we were teenagers. "Emma, you've been saying that since you dropped out of your PhD program. Mom and Dad are worried sick. They think you're having some kind of quarter-life crisis that's lasted a decade." What she didn't know was that I'd left my doctoral program because my research had taken an unexpected turn. What started as a thesis on biomedical sensors had evolved into something that could revolutionize how we monitor human health. But explaining that to someone who measured success by salary figures and office square footage felt impossible. My tiny one-bedroom apartment in a converted warehouse looked nothing like success by conventional standards. The living room had been transformed into a workshop, with folding tables supporting various stages of my prototypes. Cables snaked across the floor like technological vines, and my couch was buried under technical manuals and patent applications that I'd printed at the library to save money. The kitchen was functional only in the sense that it boiled water and heated soup. Every available surface was covered with components, tools, or documentation. But Jessica saw only the chaos and the bills I sometimes struggled to pay on time. She saw the rejection letters from traditional tech companies who couldn't understand my vision. She saw her little sister who'd supposedly lost her way after showing so much promise in school. "There are 3 pharmaceutical companies recruiting engineers right now," she'd continued that morning, pulling out her phone to show me job listings. "Stable salary, benefits, 401k matching. You could be making 6 figures within 2 years." I'd nodded politely while thinking about the email I'd received the day before from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office informing me that my application had moved to the final review stage. Patent 10.84739 pending for a continuous health monitoring system using microsensor arrays. The name was dry and technical, but what it represented was anything but ordinary. The device I'd been perfecting was smaller than a contact lens, but could monitor dozens of health markers continuously, transmitting data wirelessly to healthcare providers and alerting users to potential problems before symptoms appeared. Early detection that could save millions of lives and billions in healthcare costs. The prototype sitting on my kitchen table could detect the earliest signs of heart attacks, strokes, diabetic emergencies, and even some cancers with 94% accuracy in preliminary testing. But Jessica saw only an unemployed woman tinkering with electronics in a cluttered apartment. "I appreciate the concern," I had said carefully, "but I'm committed to my current path." She'd sighed dramatically, the way she did when she thought I was being deliberately obtuse. "Emma, this isn't sustainable. You can't live on savings forever." If only she knew that the savings she was worried about had actually been supplemented by 3 separate research grants that I had received under the nonprofit status I'd quietly established 18 months earlier. Or that 2 of the biggest medical device companies in the world had been calling me weekly since my preliminary results were published in the Journal of Biomedical Engineering. But sharing good news prematurely often led to more pressure and interference than encouragement. The truth was more complicated than what appeared on the surface. While my bank account looked perpetually empty, that was because every dollar went immediately back into research and development. The grants covered my basic living expenses, but barely. I'd chosen to reinvest everything into making my prototype perfect rather than improving my quality of life. It was a calculated risk that looked like failure from the outside. My phone had buzzed during that coffee meeting, and I'd glanced down to see a text from Dr. Sarah Chen, my former thesis advisor, who'd become an unofficial mentor. The review committee wants to schedule a presentation for your patent application. This could be it, Emma. Call me when you can. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without responding, but my heart had started racing. The presentation would be the final step before approval. If everything went well, I'd have exclusive rights to technology that early industry estimates suggested could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars within the first 5 years of commercial production. But sitting across from Jessica in that coffee shop, surrounded by the ambient sounds of successful people living conventional lives, I'd simply said, "I understand your concerns, but I need more time." Now, alone in my apartment with the city asleep around me, I held up the latest iteration of my prototype. The microsensor was so small it was barely visible, but it represented 5 years of 18-hour days, countless failed experiments, and a vision that nobody in my family understood. Tomorrow, I'd call Dr. Chen back and schedule the presentation that could change everything. I set the prototype down carefully and walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline. Most of the office buildings were dark, but I could see the lights of Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital in the distance, where my devices might someday save lives that traditional medicine might miss. The irony was not lost on me that while my family saw a woman who had lost her way, I was potentially months away from technology that could revolutionize healthcare. My phone chimed with an incoming email, and I walked back to check it. The sender was Dr. Marcus Rodriguez from Stanford Medical Center, where I'd been collaborating on clinical trials. The subject line read, "Breakthrough results, call ASAP." I smiled, thinking about tomorrow's conversation with Jessica. Some revelations were worth waiting for. 3 weeks later, I stood in the marble lobby of the Hyatt Regency in downtown Denver, adjusting my navy blazer and checking my presentation materials one final time. The Colorado Medical Innovation Summit was the state's premier healthcare technology conference, and this year I was scheduled to present my research to an audience that included venture capitalists, medical device executives, and healthcare administrators from across the region. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. "Patent approval came through this morning. Congratulations, Dr. Blackwood. You're officially the sole inventor of revolutionary health monitoring technology." I smiled, slipping the phone back into my briefcase. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The presentation hall was already filling with attendees in expensive suits and designer dresses, the kind of crowd that Jessica would feel right at home with. I'd chosen this particular conference carefully, knowing that several major medical corporations would be sending their acquisition teams. What I hadn't expected was to see my sister's familiar figure near the registration table, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her charcoal suit impeccable as always. Jessica was part of a group clustered around the coffee station, and I could see her checking her phone repeatedly with that impatient expression she wore during business meetings. She must be here representing one of her firm's healthcare clients, probably providing legal counsel for some corporate transaction. Our paths rarely crossed professionally, given that I operated in research circles while she moved through boardrooms and courtrooms. I made my way to the speaker check-in table, where a young woman with a tablet smiled brightly. "Dr. Blackwood, we're so excited for your presentation. The advance registration for your session has been incredible. We had to move you to the main auditorium to accommodate demand." "Thank you," I replied, accepting my speaker badge and presentation remote. "I'm looking forward to sharing the research." "The investors are particularly interested," she continued, lowering her voice slightly.
We've had inquiries from Medtronic, Johnson & Johnson, and several venture capital firms about potential meetings after your talk. I nodded professionally, though internally my excitement was building. This was exactly what I'd been working toward. The presentation would be my public debut, the moment when 5 years of quiet research would finally see daylight. I deliberately kept a low profile until now, publishing only in academic journals and presenting at small research conferences. Today would be different. The morning keynote was already underway as I made my way toward the main auditorium to familiarize myself with the space. Through the partially open doors, I could hear the speaker discussing the future of personalized medicine and the critical need for breakthrough monitoring technologies. It was the perfect setup for my presentation. "Emma!" Jessica's voice stopped me in the hallway. She looked genuinely surprised to see me, her eyebrows raised in confusion. "What are you doing here? This is a medical technology conference." "I'm presenting research," I said simply, holding up my speaker badge. She glanced at the badge, reading my name and title. Dr. Emma Blackwood, Chief Technology Officer. She looked back up at me with a frown. "CTO of what company? I thought you were freelancing." "Blackwood Biomedical. It's my research foundation." "Your research foundation?" Jessica's tone carried that familiar note of skepticism. "Emma, this conference costs $1,500 just to attend. These are serious business people, not academics playing with gadgets in their kitchens." Before I could respond, a man in an expensive suit approached us. "Dr. Blackwood." He extended his hand with a warm smile. "David Kim from Venture Medical Partners. We've been following your work since the journal publication. I'm particularly interested in discussing licensing opportunities after your presentation." I shook his hand professionally. "Thank you, Mr. Kim. I look forward to our conversation." He handed me his business card and walked away, leaving Jessica staring after him with a bewildered expression. "Licensing opportunities?" she asked quietly. "Emma, what exactly are you presenting here?" "Continuous health monitoring using microsensor technology. It's the research I've been working on." "The stuff you've been tinkering with in your apartment?" She looked around the opulent conference venue, taking in the corporate banners and networking groups. "These people think that's worth discussing licensing deals?" "We'll find out in about an hour," I said mildly. The auditorium was packed when I took the stage. Nearly 800 attendees filled every seat, with additional standing room in the back. I could see Jessica in the third row, sitting next to a group of attorneys who were probably her colleagues. Her expression was one of intense curiosity, mixed with something that might have been nervousness. I clicked to my first slide, showing a microscopic image of my sensor prototype. "Good morning. I'm Dr. Emma Blackwood, and I'm here to share research that has the potential to prevent millions of deaths annually while reducing healthcare costs by an estimated $40 billion per year." The room immediately became silent, the kind of focused attention that venture capitalists give to presentations that might change their portfolios forever. I could see phones being discreetly positioned to record, and several people in the front row were already taking detailed notes. Current health monitoring is reactive. We treat symptoms after they appear, often when intervention opportunities have already passed. What if instead we could detect health crises days or weeks before symptoms manifest? I spent the next 30 minutes walking through my research, demonstrating how my microsensors could continuously monitor dozens of biomarkers simultaneously. The data showed early detection rates that exceeded anything currently available in the medical field. Heart attacks detected an average of 6 days before occurrence, strokes identified up to 2 weeks early, diabetic emergencies predicted with 96% accuracy before patients experienced any symptoms. The audience was captivated. I could see executives leading forward, venture capitalists typing rapidly on their phones, and medical professionals nodding as they recognized the implications of the technology. When I reached the slide showing preliminary clinical trial results, someone in the audience actually gasped audibly. "The commercial applications are significant," I said, clicking to my final slides. "Conservative projections suggest this technology could capture 15% of the global health monitoring market within 5 years, representing approximately $12 billion in annual revenue potential." When I finished, the applause was immediate and sustained. During the Q&A session, the inquiries came from representatives of every major medical device company, several venture capital firms, and research institutions from around the world. The inquiries were sophisticated, demonstrating that this audience understood exactly what they were seeing. As I left the stage, I was immediately surrounded by business cards and meeting requests. The conference organizers had to establish a queue system for the private meetings that every major attendee wanted to schedule. I could see Jessica still in her seat, staring at the stage with an expression of complete shock. Dr. Chen appeared beside me, beaming with pride. "That was extraordinary, Amma. I've never seen a response like that at a medical conference. The patent approval timing was perfect." "Patent approval?" Jessica's voice came from directly behind us. She had managed to navigate through the crowd and was standing close enough to overhear. "You have actual patents?" As of this morning, patent 10.847392 for continuous health monitoring using microsensor arrays. It covers the core technology and manufacturing processes.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
But Emma, Jessica said slowly, her voice carrying a note of something I'd never heard before. Respect, maybe? Or possibly fear. Do you realize what just happened in there? Those were acquisition teams from the biggest medical companies in the world. They were talking about billions of dollars. "I know," I said simply. The conference coordinator approached with a tablet full of meeting requests. "Dr. Blackwood, we need to discuss your schedule. We have 17 companies requesting private presentations, including 3 that are prepared to make immediate acquisition offers." Jessica listened to this exchange with growing amazement. "Acquisition offers? Emma, how long has this been going on?" "About 5 years," I replied, signing the meeting schedule, though the serious interest started about 6 months ago when the preliminary trial results were published. 6 months ago? Jessica's voice rose slightly. "When you were telling me you needed more time to figure things out?" "I did need more time," I said calmly. "I needed time to perfect the technology, complete the trials, and secure the patents before going public. Today was the public debut." A woman in an impeccable suit approached us, introducing herself as the Chief Technology Officer of Medtronic. "Dr. Blackwood, we'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss potential partnership opportunities. We're prepared to make a very substantial offer." After she walked away, Jessica stood in silence for a long moment, processing everything she'd witnessed. Around us, the conference buzzed with excitement as attendees discussed the implications of what they'd just seen. I could hear fragments of conversations estimating market values and discussing patent strategies. "Emma," Jessica said finally, her voice quiet and uncertain, "I think I owe you an apology." The private meeting with Medtronic took place in a conference suite on the hotel's top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains. Jessica had asked if she could observe, claiming professional curiosity about intellectual property negotiations, and I'd agreed. I suspected she needed to see this process to fully understand what I'd been building during those years she thought I was wasting my life. The Medtronic team consisted of 5 executives, including their chief medical officer and head of global acquisitions. They'd prepared a comprehensive presentation about their company's market position and growth strategy, clearly expecting serious negotiations. The lead executive, Dr. Patricia Walsh, opened with their preliminary offer. "Dr. Blackwood, based on our analysis of your technology and its market potential, we're prepared to offer $450 million for exclusive licensing rights, with additional performance-based payments that could reach $800 million over 7 years. Jessica, sitting quietly in the corner taking notes, nearly dropped her pen. I saw her mouth the number silently, her expression shifting from surprise to something approaching awe. But I'd been expecting numbers in this range ever since my technology had been independently validated by Stanford Medical Center 3 months earlier. "That's generous," I replied calmly. "But I'm not interested in exclusive licensing to a single corporation. My goal is to maximize global access to this technology, not restrict it to one company's distribution network." Dr. Walsh leaned forward. "We understand your concern about access, but our global infrastructure could bring your technology to market faster than any other approach. We're talking about implementation in over 40 countries within 18 months. And pricing that reflects your profit margins rather than maximum patient benefit," I countered.
I've spent 5 years developing technology that could save lives on a massive scale. I won't limit its impact for financial gain." The room fell silent. These executives were accustomed to inventors who were eager to sell, not negotiate from positions of principle. I could see them exchanging glances, recalculating their approach. "What would you consider acceptable?" asked their chief technology officer. "Non-exclusive licensing to multiple manufacturers, with pricing caps tied to healthcare accessibility indices and guaranteed production quotas for underserved markets. I want this technology available globally, not just in countries that can afford premium medical devices." Jessica was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not the condescending concern of our recent conversations, but something closer to admiration mixed with bewilderment. The woman she'd been lecturing about financial responsibility was turning down nearly $500 million because the terms didn't align with her values. The negotiations continued for 2 hours, with me outlining the licensing structure I had been developing with my intellectual property attorney. Multiple companies could manufacture the devices under specific guidelines with built-in requirements for affordable pricing in developing nations. It was more complex than simple acquisition, but it would ensure maximum global impact. When the Medtronic team left to discuss my terms, Jessica and I found ourselves alone in the conference room. She sat quietly for several minutes, staring out at the mountains while processing what she'd witnessed. "I don't understand you," she said finally. "They just offered you enough money to live like royalty for the rest of your life, and you're negotiating for less profit to help people you'll never meet." "I'm negotiating for maximum impact," I corrected. "Money was never the primary goal." "But Emma, you've been living on rice and beans for years. You could afford a real apartment, a new car, anything you wanted." I smiled, thinking about the conversation I had with my financial advisor the previous week. "Jessica, I need to tell you something. The rice and beans lifestyle isn't because I'm broke. It's because I've been reinvesting everything into research and development." "From what?" she asked. "I thought you were barely surviving on freelance work." "The freelance coding pays my basic expenses, but I've also received 3 major research grants totaling $2.8 million over the past 18 months, plus consulting fees for medical institutions testing my prototypes." Jessica's eyebrows shot up. $2.8 million? Emma, where is that money? "Invested back into the research. Better equipment, clinical trials, patent applications, legal fees for intellectual property protection. I chose to live minimally so I could maximize the technology development." She shook her head slowly. "So when I've been lecturing you about financial responsibility, you've been talking to someone who chose poverty to fund innovation. There's a difference between being broke and being strategic." My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Rodriguez at Stanford.
Emma, need to talk ASAP. The trial results are even better than we thought. Call me when you can. More good news? Jessica asked, noticing my smile. Probably. The clinical trials have been exceeding projections consistently. We're detecting health issues earlier and more accurately than anyone predicted. Over the next 3 hours, we met with representatives from Johnson & Johnson, Boston Scientific, and 2 major venture capital firms. Each meeting followed a similar pattern: impressive offers, followed by my insistence on global accessibility over maximum profit. Jessica observed each negotiation with growing fascination, watching me turn down increasingly large sums of money to maintain control over how the technology would be distributed. During a break between meetings, she finally asked the question I'd been expecting. "Why didn't you tell me? Why let me think you were failing when you were building something this significant?" I considered my answer carefully. Because I needed to succeed or fail on my own terms, without family pressure or interference. If I'd told you about the grants and the potential, you would have wanted to help manage the business side. Mom and Dad would have started giving advice about corporate strategy. Everyone would have had opinions about what I should do. "But we could have supported you," she protested. "You can support me now," I said, but I needed to prove to myself that I could build something meaningful independently. Success that comes from your own vision feels different than success that comes from family connections or conventional paths. That evening, after the final meetings concluded, Jessica and I sat in the hotel bar reviewing the day's offers. The total proposed licensing deals exceeded $1.2 billion, with additional performance incentives that could double that amount over the next decade.
But more importantly, I'd structured agreements that would ensure global accessibility while maintaining quality standards. I still can't believe you turned down exclusive deals worth hundreds of millions, Jessica said, shaking her head. Most people would have taken the first offer. Most people aren't trying to revolutionize healthcare, I replied. Money is useful, but impact is what matters. 20 years from now, I want to know that my technology saved lives in rural clinics in Africa, not just premium hospitals in Manhattan. And you really think this will work? Global distribution with affordable pricing? I've studied the medical device industry for 5 years. There's room for a different approach, one that prioritizes patient outcomes over shareholder returns. It just takes someone willing to leave money on the table to make it happen. Jessica raised her glass in a toast. To my sister, who turned down $500 million to save the world. To my sister, who's finally ready to hear what I've been trying to build, I replied, clinking her glass. The following week, news of my technology breakthrough appeared in medical journals and business publications worldwide. The story wasn't just about innovative sensors, but about a new model for medical device development that prioritized global access over maximum profit. Several other inventors reached out, inspired by the licensing structure I'd created. My parents called the day the Wall Street Journal article was published, their voices mixing pride with amazement. They'd spent years worrying about my unconventional path, never realizing I was building something that could change how the world approaches preventative healthcare. But the conversation that meant the most was with Jessica, who stopped by my apartment the following Sunday. She looked around my cluttered workspace with new eyes, seeing the organized chaos of innovation rather than the mess of failure. I owe you a bigger apology than I gave you at the conference, she said. I've been judging your choices based on conventional definitions of success when you were creating your own definition. Different people define success differently, Shu. For you, it's partnership at a prestigious firm and financial security. For me, it's knowing that my work might prevent someone's grandmother from dying of an undetected heart attack. Can I ask you something? She said. When you were eating rice and beans and struggling to pay rent, did you ever doubt yourself? Did you ever think, maybe I was right about getting a conventional job? I considered the question seriously. Every day. But doubt doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're pushing boundaries. If everyone understood what you were doing, you probably wouldn't be innovating. As Jessica left that evening, she paused at the door. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Not because of the money or the recognition, but because you had the courage to build something nobody else could see. 6 months later, my microsensors began clinical deployment in 12 countries simultaneously. The first life saved through early detection was a construction worker in Phoenix, Arizona, whose device detected pre-heart attack conditions 4 days before he would have experienced symptoms. The technology that started in my kitchen was now protecting people around the world. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from people others have written off as dreamers. Sometimes the most important work happens in cluttered apartments while families worry about practical concerns. And sometimes the best measure of success isn't how much money you make, but how many lives you change. If you're building something that others don't understand, if you're pursuing a vision that seems impossible to everyone around you, remember that innovation often looks like failure until suddenly it looks like genius. Keep building. Keep believing, and trust that the right people will eventually understand what you're creating. Because the best revolutions start quietly in the hands of people who refuse to accept that things have to stay the way they are. 2 years after that conference, I stood in the same cluttered apartment where it all began, but now the space served a different purpose. The kitchen table had been replaced with a proper desk, and the walls were covered in framed articles from medical journals documenting lives saved by early detection technology. The cramped workspace had become a shrine to what's possible when you refuse to let others define your limitations. The latest email in my inbox was from Dr. Sarah Martinez in Guatemala, reporting that my sensors had detected early-stage diabetes in over 300 patients who had no idea they were at risk. Each detection represented a life trajectory altered, a family spared the devastation of uncontrolled disease. The technology that Jessica once dismissed as garage tinkering was now preventing medical emergencies across 6 continents. But the transformation that meant the most wasn't measured in lives saved or revenue generated. It was the shift in how my family understood the difference between conventional success and meaningful impact. Jessica had become one of my strongest advocates, using her legal expertise to help establish the Blackwood Foundation, which ensured continued affordable access to health monitoring technology in underserved communities worldwide. My parents, who had spent years politely asking when I'd find stability, now introduced me as their daughter who chose purpose over profit. The dinner conversations that once focused on my need for a real career now centered on the latest deployment of sensors in refugee camps and rural medical clinics. Success, they'd learned, wasn't always measured by the standards they'd expected. The most profound change was internal. The years of doubt, of wondering if I was deluding myself about the value of my work, had been replaced by quiet confidence in the power of persistence. Every rejection letter, every family conversation about practical concerns, every night spent questioning whether I was wasting my potential had led to this moment where innovation born in isolation was now protecting human life globally. Standing in that apartment, I realized that the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to pursue a vision that others can't see yet. The patent office had my application, but more importantly, the world now had technology that transformed how we think about preventive healthcare. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs require the smallest beginnings, and the most important work happens when nobody else is watching.